I went on, and welcome to Autism Live.
You hear me okay?
I can hear you perfectly. Can you hear me okay?
Fantastic.
And we're going to ask the audience if they can hear you too, because you are a little bit low in my ear, but I can hear you perfectly. So Kyle, tell us why you are the Driven Autism Dad.
You know, I think probably our story is like a lot of other family stories. Right when we first got the diagnosis, my wife and I were kind of excited because now we thought, okay, now that we've got the diagnosis, we can give him the help he needs so that we can figure out the craziness going on in our home, right? And so I think at that point, we really were, I won't say excited about getting the diagnosis, but we felt relieved. Now we can start the process of getting the experts' advice and going through all those things that'll help us kind of restore some of the normalcy in our home. Our first son, who was diagnosed on the autism spectrum, is more severe, and we had two sons at the time, and our two typical sons, my wife and I both spent our whole lives wanting to be parents, right? And we were really excited about being parents, and we had studied and worked, and we thought we're going to be the greatest parents ever. I think every parent feels like that, right?
Yeah.
And with our first two kids, things were going well, right? I mean, we had different things in place that were good for discipline and happiness and joy, and we were really enjoying our two little boys. And when my third son came along, we kind of thought we had lost all ability to parent, right? Because nothing was working for our two other sons. And so when we finally got the autism diagnosis, we thought, you know what, finally now we can get the help we need as a family, and we can restore what we had been building. And so, we got them into therapies and ABA and all the different things the experts say to do. We did all those things. We did everything and more. We spent thousands of dollars on different, we tried everything. As a matter, we even at one point sent some of his poop over to France to be diagnosed. I don't know what that was about, but
I can tell you what that's about, but we'll talk about that later. It actually is going to help people down the road, Kyle. It wasn't useless.
Okay.
It wasn't.
Okay, good. Well, it didn't seem to help us because with all the things we were doing, we were still struggling with what I will call, and all those things helped him, but we were still overwhelmed by the stress of what we called home challenges. Right, and these were the things that I think, I'm sure I'm not going to surprise anybody with these things. The meltdowns over a lost Lego piece that could last for an hour until we found it.
Yeah.
Sometimes the rage, even to a point of violence. And he was a pretty young kid at the time, biting, kicking, screaming, smashing iPads and TVs. Extreme defiance, all the things I'm sure that a lot of these parents have dealt with, we were still facing. And so even though we had him in all these therapies and all these different ABAs and all these different things, my wife and I were still struggling, and my two older sons, with those home challenges. I learned later on that those therapies and those ABAs help those kids, our kids, but they don't necessarily solve the stress in our homes. And so it got to a point where my wife and I were at conflict over how to discipline, how to manage the stress, what we were going to do, even to a point where the stress was overwhelming. I remember one time my wife said that I got home from work one day and she was just crying. And I said, "What's the matter?" And she said, it's like an earthquake is hitting the house at the same time as a flood and a tornado is blowing everything around. She said, it's just, you have no idea, right? And the stress was overwhelming between all the things that were happening in our home. And it was creating conflict between me and my two oldest sons, because, he would melt down and I would say, "What'd you do?" Right? And they didn't do anything. Right? They were just being boys, right? And it all kind of came to a head one Saturday morning at probably about 6:30 in the morning. My wife and I were awakened by this blood-curdling scream. The kind you hear in horror movies, right? And my son Eric was having a meltdown, and we didn't know what it was, but he had woke. The whole house was awake now, And typically a meltdown would last anywhere from, 10 minutes to 45 minutes maybe. This one lasted 4 hours. And every time we thought we were getting him kind of calmed back down, he would ramp back up, and there was walls smashed with holes in them. One of our front windows was smashed out. We found something big enough to smash that and threw it. And by the time we finally got him calmed down after 4 hours, the stress was so overwhelming. My two older sons had hidden themselves in their room and locked the door so they could stay out of the fray. And my wife and I, our nerves were like so frayed, right? That we kind of, and I'm kind of embarrassed to say this, but probably other people have experienced this too. We kind of started to take it out on each other, right? My wife and I. And I think sometimes when things are going wrong, we want to blame somebody.
Yeah.
And sometimes I think we have this tendency to blame those that are closest to us, right? And my wife was very feminine and just a Southern belle. And I, on the other hand, grew up a fighter. So typically these confrontations between she and I kind of went me fighting, her eventually crying. Then we would eventually, figure it out. This one, she was fighting. She was done. And she said, if you wouldn't be so hard on him, if you just show him more love. And I said, he needs more discipline. And it was just these things that the conflict was so overwhelming, we were just hurling insults back and forth at each other. Yeah. And it got so bad and it wasn't stopping that I thought, you know what, this isn't really going anywhere. It's just going to get worse and worse. So I grabbed my keys and I walked out on my front porch. And, just in my mind, I was enraged. This isn't the life I signed up for, right, in my mind. And I'm thinking, I just can't live like this. This is not the family that I envisioned. We're working as hard as we possibly can. We're doing everything they're telling us to do. And we're still in this situation where the stress is overwhelming, and it's tremendous. And so at that moment, I remember standing there with my keys in my pocket and thinking, I'm leaving. I'm just going to hop in my car and I'm going to leave. And I didn't really know what I was going to do. But at that moment, a memory of my dad popped into my head. And it was when I was about 12 or 13, I was in a baseball game, and I was playing a position called shortstop. And there was 2 outs in the last inning, and all we needed was 1 out, and the game would be over, and we would win. Well, the guy hit the ball to me, and I made an error. I fumbled the ball. And then the next guy got on base, and the next guy, and they ended up winning the game, and it was all my fault, right? And I remember, this can devastate a 12-year-old, right? And I remember I was just overwhelmingly devastated because it was all my fault, right? The whole thing was my fault. If I just made the play, we would have won. And so I walked over to my dad after the game, and I said, Dad, I wish the ball hadn't been hit to me, because then we could have won. And my dad just, so lovingly and kind, he leaned into me and he said, you know what, Kyle? That's not the way we do things. He said, you want to prepare yourself so that you want every ball, every game hit to you. He said, you never want to push your success or failure off to somebody else. You want to be the reason for success or failure in your life. You want to prepare yourself and work so hard that you're okay with whatever happens. He says, never, ever pass the buck. He says, if you're going to lose or you're going to go down, don't you go down without the biggest fight you can possibly give, right? And so that memory was in my brain. I'm like, I can't go down. I can't give up my family without the absolute biggest fight I can give. And so at that moment, I remember we lived in a little town called Rocket, Texas, which is just outside of Dallas. And we had a big, giant pecan tree. It was probably a 40-foot tall pecan tree. And so I did something else my dad had taught me, and I went over under that pecan tree, and I just prayed. I just knelt and prayed. I didn't know what else to do, right? And so I don't remember what happened or what I said or any of those things, but I do remember feeling like, I got the message. The problem is not your wife or your kids or your sons on the spectrum. The problem is you. Work on you. Fix you. And you can do that, right? And initially, when I got that message, I was defiant, right? You don't understand, God. I remember thinking this. I've done everything, right? I can't do anything. And I remember just thinking, fix you, right? And so that was the day that I thought, you know what? I'm not ever going to leave, and I'm never going to quit trying to figure this stuff out. And so I think that is the day that I became what I call the Driven Autism Dad. I'm driven to figure this stuff out, right? To figure out home challenges, to create strategies that help us to manage ourselves in a way that allow us to be happy and thrive. And I remember I went back inside, and I think my wife saw me praying. I really think she did, because she had changed a little bit, but not enough. And I said, you know what, Shelly, I'm not leaving, and I'm going to fix this. And she said, yeah, we'll see how that goes, right? I think at that point, she had just she was in the same state as me, right? It was just overwhelming, and I had heard her before say, I can't live like this. But that was the day that I made it my mission. I didn't care what else happened. I didn't care if I ever figured it out. I was going to die trying to figure it out. That was the point. And I think that's what made me, and that's why I call myself the Driven Autism Dad. If there's a problem, if there's a home challenge that we have, I'm gonna put together a plan, and I'm gonna try it. And if I fail, I'm gonna try something else. And if I fail, I'm gonna try something else until I figure it out. And once I figure it out, I'm gonna start using that plan to really. And I think that's really where we started to have success as a family, which is how do we manage ourselves in our home, right? Those home challenges can tear us apart, or they can bring us closer together depending on how we manage them. So that's really kind of how I came up to be the Driven Autism Dad.
And so, because I know for some of the people listening to your story, I'm sure that there were parents who were identifying with your story, but I'm also sure that there were folks on the spectrum who were feeling that, because it's hard to hear parents talk about what it felt like when their kids were having tantrums before we get to a point, like you said, where you realize that the problem wasn't your kids. The problem was how you were reacting to it. Because, Phoenix wrote in and said, I think meltdowns are neurological storms that might spring from unresolved or unresolved stressors, not tantrums, so don't take them personally, which is what you got to.
Right.
And I need for people to hear that Kyle, and I see parents all the time that they go, what is this mental shift that people have when they're like, I'm no longer fighting against my child's diagnosis? But I think you described it perfectly. And it's not that you were wrong either, that there was something wrong with you, but it's a different mindset, a different way of looking at it. So take us into that scenario again, Kyle. So now, if one of your sons starts to have a meltdown, how are you reacting now? Because it changes everything, right?
Absolutely, it does. It's funny because one of my sons recently, one of my older sons who's now married, he and his wife were watching me, and he says, I'm shocked at how patient you are, right? and how disciplined you are. And it surprised me because I don't think of myself as patient or disciplined, right? I just have created a strategy that I know works. And so I step into that. And it's interesting you say that because, here's what I think where we start to have problems as parents on the autism spectrum. We believe, and we're right, that our child is unique. Every child is unique, right? So we think, well, that won't work for me because I have two sons on the spectrum. One is more severe, one's more high functioning, and one is an introvert and one is an extrovert. We have all these reasons, right? Or our family's different. We have 6 kids, right? And so my wife and I used to use this term called yeah, but, right? Yeah, but you don't understand. That won't work for me because, right, of this. So yeah, but, and we would constantly do that. But the reality is, it is a mind shift. It's really a change in how we do things. And really the key for us was to create those strategies that were unique to us. Now, the cool part is we created a framework that we've helped other parents use to create their own strategies that are based on the framework, right? And I'll give you an example of one. So,
but Traven, can you boost his volume again? They're saying his volume dropped again. Because I want them to be able to hear what you're saying, Kyle.
Okay.
And then, but go ahead. I think Traven's got it. So go ahead and tell us an example of one of the frameworks.
Yeah, so the framework goes like this. So we would identify a challenge in our family. For instance, I'll just talk about meltdowns, right?
Yeah.
And what we did was we said, hey, here's what meltdowns are resulting in our home, right? They were resulting in, we were walking around on eggshells, afraid of the next meltdown. Right, so we weren't really being our typical selves. we were we would isolate from other people. They would creates this turmoil, and so we started isolating. We started not wanting to take him places to the movies or to these different places. So all these things were a result of us not managing it very well, right? And so we said we would write down all the challenges that we were facing and the results, because what that did for us is that gave us a really good reason, right? That we kind of magnified the pain we were in so that we would really want to solve the problem, right? And I'll share with you real quick, it was when I started really searching for this, I found a story about a character by the name of Alex Honnold. And I don't know if you've heard his story. He's the free solo guy. He's a mountain climber that climbs mountains with no ropes, right? And what that means is if he makes one mistake, he dies, right? There's no ropes to save him. And so as I read his story, he said, I'm not the greatest climber, and I don't have the strongest hands and all these things. He said, but I do three things. And he identified those three things. And I thought, and these were the three things he says: I'm going to get trained. Number one. Number two, I'm going to make one good decision, right? So he doesn't look 100 feet up and say, how am I going to get there? He looks right above himself and makes one good decision. And the third thing he said, which really struck me, is I don't freak out. Right? If he sticks his hand in a crevice and tries to lock it into hold, and it's wet from the previous, from the moisture from the night, and his hand slips out, he doesn't freak out, right? And the problem is, it's hard not to freak out when things start to go horribly wrong. Yeah. Right? So our strategy became we're going to write down the problem or the challenge we're having, in this case, meltdowns. And then we're going to create a strategy that is very specific and gives us tactics we can follow every time. And we're hoping that'll lead us to being able to manage that in a better way. And I'll tell you the one we came up with we called this strategy Winning Every Meltdown. And I'll give you an acronym. And if you have a piece of paper and a pencil, I'm suggesting you write this down and do it in your own life, because it's a powerful strategy. So the acronym is APWEC, APWEC, for Winning Every Meltdown. And I'll describe what that means. So APWEC means, the A means assume there will be meltdowns, okay? So assume there will be meltdowns. These kids have meltdowns sometimes, right? They get overstimulated, things happen, and they have meltdowns. Why are we so shocked when they have a meltdown? I've seen parents that when their kids have meltdowns, they're surprised. I'm like, why are you surprised? Right? That you've made the biggest mistake of all. Sometimes our kids have meltdowns. We shouldn't be surprised when they do, right? We should never be surprised. We should say, that's okay, right? The P is for prepare yourself. When they do have a meltdown, prepare yourself mentally and physically. Physically means stand up straight, right? Put yourself in a state of power, right? Knowing you can handle this. And mentally put yourself in a state of, I can manage this, right? I'm going to manage this with love and kindness. And I'm going to get my son or daughter through this meltdown, right? So assume there will be meltdowns. Prepare yourself mentally and physically. The P in APWAC, and it'll be easy to remember if you think of it like the duck, right? The APWAC, right? That duck makes it a lot easier to remember. So assume there will be meltdowns. Prepare yourself mentally and physically. The W is for win the meltdown. Now, we don't win the meltdown by shortening it or getting our way. We win it through kindness and love, right? When our kids are having meltdowns, the last thing they need us to do is join the fray. We can't. By doing that, all we do is make it worse, right? We go in and we say, "Are you okay?" Right? And you sit down with them, and if they're on the floor in Walmart screaming and yelling, you sit down with them and you console them. And you say, "It's okay," right? And you show them kindness and love for however long it takes until they start to recover, right? And that's winning a meltdown, and that's a fantastic way to do it, because then really the stress comes in when we join their fray. And we get so exhausted, and it's just it wears us down. But when we're kind and loving during that process, they feel it, and we can maintain our energy and our happiness level, right? The E in APWEC is energy and endure, right? If we manage these meltdowns in the right way, and we're winning through kindness and love and compassion, we have energy. It doesn't sap our energy like it does if we're freaking out with them. And that just makes it worse anyway. So, and also endure. Sometimes meltdowns are going to last a few minutes. Sometimes they come at the wrong time. We have to be able to endure that and to manage that in a way that allows us to go through it in a positive way for them. And by the way, don't think they're not watching us during this, right? Don't think our kids aren't paying attention to how we manage things, because they are, and they're learning how to manage themselves as well. And the C in APWAC is for celebrate. And here's one thing I think we don't do enough of as parents. When we do the right thing at the right time, when we're all done and we walk away, we need to take a second and go, yes, right? That's what I'm talking about. Right? I managed that meltdown so perfectly, right? And I gave him or her the love and the kindness and the compassion they needed. And if you'll use that formula, APWAC, when your child has a meltdown, assume they'll have meltdowns. A, prepare yourself mentally and physically. Stand up straight, stand up tall. You can manage it. You've done it before. Win through kindness and compassion and love. Endure and have energy, because you know you're going to need energy for the rest of the day. If they have a meltdown in the morning and it ruins you for the rest of the day because it saps all your energy, you're in trouble. We're all in trouble, right?
Right.
And then C, celebrate. Do not ever forget to celebrate. I'll never forget the first time my son had a meltdown one morning. We were going to go to the park, and my son had a meltdown at about 10 o'clock. And so I said, I got it, babe. I told my wife, and I ran upstairs. And 15 minutes later, I came back downstairs, and I said, all right, we're ready to go to the park. And she said, Kyle, you got to stop this. I said, stop what? She says, if you keep suppressing your anger and frustration, you're going to explode on us. I said, I'm not angry or frustrated. I said, I have a strategy. And that strategy, not only does it get me through with happiness and kindness and courage and show him the love he needs, he's watching me. He's learning and modeling that behavior. And now we have energy. And if we want to go over to the park and take him, guess what? If he has a meltdown at the park, guess what happens? APWAC. I run over there and I take care of it, and we handle it, right? And it's so powerful. My wife called me one day at work, and she had taken the kids to the movies. And she called me, and she said, hey, Eric had a meltdown at the movies, right? And I said, oh, no. And she said, oh, no, don't worry about it. I got it. I said, what happened? She said, well, during the previews, he got overstimulated, and he ran out of the theater screaming, and he ran into the hall and laid on the floor and started screaming and yelling. And so my wife went out there, and she APWAC'd, right? It's exactly what she did. And a couple of people started looking and staring. And, naturally for us, we're like, what are you staring at? Well, that's not what she did. She said, you know what, if you'll give me a few minutes, I'd love to tell you what's going on, right?
Yeah.
And so she stayed with him. And shortly after that, she just stayed there and hugged on him and loved on him and said, it's okay, we're going to go back in now. And he went back in, and she came back out, and they were still waiting. And she said, he had a meltdown, and he's on the autism spectrum. And she said, but we manage it in a way. And she got to do what I call good autism awareness, right? Yeah. She wasn't mad because they were staring. They were confused. People stare when they don't know what's going on. Why are we so mad at them? They don't know, right? It's our job to teach them. And by managing it in that way, not only was she able to manage it with him, she was able to share that with them. And then when I got home, she was excited, right? She celebrated that experience. Now, ultimately, the real cool part about it is this strategy made it so that we could start going to the park again, right? If he melted down, our friends would call us and say, you want to go somewhere? We'd say, yeah. We'd take our whole families. And when it happened, we'd manage it. And they would watch, and they would go, oh, that's awesome, right? And they would see, and we could do that autism awareness. And it changed our family, because instead of being scared of, right, or being offended by people staring, we managed it in a way that gave him the love that he needed. One of the biggest benefits, too, was that he started coming back quicker, right? His meltdowns got shorter and shorter. And as his meltdowns got shorter and shorter, we were able to talk to him about how to manage himself. When he got overstimulated, take deep breaths, but we were in a good state so we could actually have those, communications with him. So it's really cool to do this, but the formula for creating any strategy I just want to share with you is not some magnificent formula, right? It's find your challenge, write down all the things that are happening, and then write down what you want to have happen, and then create some tactics. And those tactics they're not. This is the cool part about it, because every kid is different, every family is different. Your tactics might be a little different, but if you try some tactics and you have some success, you can implement them. If some of them might not work, you'll have to implement new tactics. But the key here is to keep working at it until you figure out what works for you, right? And we've created strategies for, one of my sons has oppositional defiance disorder. We've got a strategy for that manages it beautifully, and we get him to do what we want him to and what we need him to. My wife used to be a worrywart. She couldn't sleep at night, worried about the future for them. She created a strategy for that. Arguing kids, getting your kids to eat, potty training. I mean, you name it, whatever challenge you have, if you create a strategy and you create tactics that you can implement when that strategy happens, you're able to address it and do it in a kind way with love, right? And that's really what these kids need. If they see us joining their, one time my son melted down at Walmart, and he was 17 at the time, and I was sitting in the front of Walmart with him, and you know how Walmart is, right? There was probably 20 people staring.
Yep.
And one lady came up to me, and you could tell she knew what was going on. And she said, is your son on the autism spectrum? I said, yeah, he is, but we're okay. And she said, I'm going to go over there and knock somebody out for staring at you. Right? She was really, and I said, please don't. Please don't.
Yeah.
And she said, I can't believe that. I said, you know what? If he sees that and he believes that when people don't treat you right, the best way to manage it is to attack them.
Yeah.
If he sees that, that's what he learns, right? So if my son has a meltdown and I attack people for staring, he sees me attack. And my son, I don't know about other kids, but they don't have a line, right? Most of us have a line we draw in the sand we won't cross. He doesn't have a line, right? He'll go as deep as he needs. I cannot have him believing by watching other people that if he doesn't like the way somebody's treating him, that he can attack them, because he will. And that causes long-term problems for us.
Well,
so
Kyle,
that's
the internet has voted and has said that you're an amazing dad. I just want you to know. And we want to let, because we're running out of time here, but we want to let people know that you are willing to share what you know, that you are willing to, you coach people, you speak for parent groups. If somebody wants to have them come to speak to their group or their church or their, whatever it is, you are available to do those things and to coach. Tell them where they can find more out about what you do in your frameworks, because I think it's wonderful telling people to make it their own, but a lot of times people are like, give me the shortcut, I want Kyle. Right? So tell them how to get that.
We work with parents in a lot of different ways. I have a Facebook page called Autism, Thrive in Chaos, and you can go there, and there's over 1,000 videos on there. You'll have to just dig through. I will warn you, and I try to do this on my videos. I'm going to be posting a video soon here where I talk about my wife and I tear up a little bit. So have some tissue ready just in case.
Yeah.
But Autism, Thrive in Chaos is my Facebook page. If you would like to know more or plug into the recipe we use or learn some of our strategies, your best bet is just to email me, and that's Kyle@drivenautismdad.com. I think I'm wearing a shirt. Yep. Kyle@drivenautismdad.com is where they can, and just make sure they mention that they saw me on Autism Live, because I put together some pretty neat stuff for your group specifically.
Oh, cool.
And we have video lessons that you can go through. We also do one-on-one coaching, and like you said, we do speaking. We've written a couple of books. There's a lot of different ways we can work with families, and in whatever capacity they choose is how we want to work with them. But you know what? We know what it's like to struggle.
Yeah.
And we know what it's like to be on the brink of disaster, right? We also know what it's like to have a family where we all want to be together.
Yeah.
And we love each other, right? And I don't worry about if something happens to me, my 2 older sons will grab my sons and love them.
Yeah.
Right? Because they know these strategies. They understand. And when a couple weekends ago, my oldest son took all my kids without me on a trip to Utah from Boise, Idaho to watch a professional basketball game.
Awesome.
Without me. because he knows how to manage those situations. He's unafraid.
Yeah.
Right? And so what a great thing it is when your kids love each other and can do that for each other.
Well, what a wonderful thing when any of us can feel capable. And I want to say, and we talk about this a lot on the show, that, you know, we talk about how stressful it is to be a caregiver for somebody on the spectrum, but we always like to remind everybody that it's not because of that individual. It's because we don't feel capable to communicate and fulfill their needs. And what you're talking about is changing that so that you can feel capable, making it so that in every circumstance that you can feel capable, and that is priceless, right? And
right.
We, you know, I since you brought it up, you know, so we said in the beginning, Kyle has 6 children, 2 on the spectrum, and you know, you were in this to win it with your wife, and then your wife passed away, and we're so sorry. And that would be enough to just drop a lot of people, Kyle.
Yeah.
But you have survived and thrived through that. So, because I know a lot of times the things that go on in people's minds are like, oh, well, it's easy for Kyle because, you know, no, Kyle has 6 kids, 2 on the spectrum, and now he is doing it as a single parent. So it's not easy for Kyle, but Kyle is still doing it. And Kyle is thriving.
And frankly, it's the same thing, right? What is the challenge? You know, and my kids and I went through this. As a matter of fact, my wife created a strategy when she was struggling with worry and not being able to sleep. She created a strategy. She called it good versus evil, right? And it helped her to stop worrying and start living. She came to me one day and she said, I feel like I'm worrying so much that I'm not at my full capacity for my kids, right? I don't have all the energy. I'm exhausted from worry and lack of sleep. And she created a strategy that helped her to stop worrying and start living for her kids, right? And for me, and I saw it. And that is the exact strategy that I pulled out whenever my wife passed away. You know, this can destroy families.
Yes.
And so I pulled her strategy out. And we studied it as a family. And I said, here is how we're going to not just survive this experience, but we're going to thrive as a family. We're going to continue to do this. That's what she would want. And that's what we're going to do. And it's actually hanging up on it's right here. I've got a little, let me see if I can reach it without. This strategy is so important to our family that we created a little bitty one. And we stuck it all over our house. It's in each of my kids' rooms. It's in the bathroom. It's hanging on our little bulletin board back here. The key here is it takes work, right? You have to put in the work. If you think, you know, I caution parents. I get a lot of parents say, you know, we finally got a diagnosis. Now it's going to be okay. And now it just starts, right?
Yeah.
Now the work starts, and you are going to have to do the work. You're going to have to work at it, but it's so worth it.
Yeah. Right?
I mean, we've seen what happens when you don't and what families can turn into and the splits and it's so worth it to work at it and to learn these strategies and do things that help you to thrive in the chaos, right?
Yeah.
And the chaos of losing my wife. I mean, she doesn't want us to fall apart as a family.
No.
And we don't want to fall apart as a family, so we're going to work at it. And you're right. We've thrived. We've stayed happy. We've stayed motivated. You know, there are moments where I have to dive into this deep because sometimes it's tough. But you can't give to others if you can't manage yourself, right?
Well, as I said, the internet has said you're an amazing dad, plus which we all really like your hair. That's been voted on too, Kyle. So, and for those of you who joined in late, I want to say too that because a lot of times we have moms watch and then they will cherry pick what they want dads to see. I think it's really important for you to have the dads go back and watch the part where Kyle was standing on the front steps and thinking about leaving because this was not what he was going to do and what turned him around to get him back in the house to get to this point. So have the dads in your lives watch that because I think that's a really important, because a lot of dads actually leave. We all know that. And you know what? A lot of times I say that's because they didn't know what to do. And if we can give them a strategy, because nobody wants to feel incompetent. Nobody wants to feel incompetent at anything, and you certainly don't want to feel incompetent at being a parent. That's a really stressful thing. So bless you, Kyle. Tell them the website again and your email again in case for the people who came in late.
So you can find me on Facebook at Autism, Thrive, and Chaos. And my email is kyle@drivenautismdad.com. We're revamping our drivenautismdad.com website, so it's probably not up yet. But yeah, so Kyle at Driven Autism Dad. When you email me, please let me know you saw me on Autism Live. And I've got some special stuff I'll send you.
There you go. That's a really cool thing. And we're thanking Bob DeMarco for connecting us with you. So, Bob, thank you for that. We look forward to hearing more from you, Kyle. So thank you so much, and bless you and your family. And thank you for all that you've been through. We'll keep you in our thoughts and prayers.
Thank you so much, Shannon.
Thank you. You have a good day. Bye-bye.
You too.